The cycle of disaster in the Dust Bowl, drought, dust storms, and failed crops begat another catastrophe. Skyrocketing temperatures that climbed into the hundreds and remained there each summer. The record-breaking heat wave didn't happen because of natural phenomena. It happened because of what man had done, plowed under the grasslands.
The reason for this is that the land surface that is vegetated during the day can cool itself quite effectively through evaporation. But when the crops are no longer there, it can't do that anymore, and it has to cool itself more like the way a tarmac parking lot cools itself during the day. It has to do it through radiation and direct heat transfer into the atmosphere. So the loss of vegetation means that the land surface and the air above it had to become very hot during the 1930s.
In 1936, the mercury in Kansas hit 121 degrees. And if the troubles weren't bad enough, high heat combined with very little rain caused household invasions. Insects that wriggled between the floorboards, seeking shade and water inside people's homes. Centipede infestations were the biggest problem. Housewives reported sweeping them up by the bucketful.
There was a woman who lived in southern Colorado who would use her iron to kill all the bugs beneath the wallpaper in her house.
And there was worse. What crawled into the house could be life-threatening. Dust Bowl survivors tell stories of death by poisonous spider bite, the victims all elderly or very young. Outside, other plagues created a biblical sense of a world coming apart. Swarms of grasshoppers infested the earth, feasted on withered gardens and whatever crops farmers had managed to keep alive. Watering holes disappeared in the drought, wiping out bird and rodent populations, which normally kept the grasshoppers in check. With no predators, these virtual eating machines consumed the last vestiges of anything green off the fields.
And they would eat everything. They would even eat off, if you had a wood handle on your shovel or your pick, they would eat that thing down to nothing.
In the mid-1930s, jackrabbits too began multiplying like mad. Their natural predators, coyotes and badgers, were also driven off or killed by the drought. Jackrabbits survived well in heat and little water. Adults gave birth to as many as 8 young each month, resulting in hordes of starving black-tailed jackrabbits tearing through western Kansas like something out of a horror film.
They're just everywhere. They got to be a real bother and ate our crops and ate the grass, what little weeds we had.
Desperate farmers began herding the rabbits into pens. 10,000 people took part in the largest rabbit drive in Kansas. In just one afternoon, they covered 8 square miles and netted some 35,000 jackrabbits.
And the time you get there, there'd just be thousands of these jackrabbits in that pen. Now that's when I left, because people get in there and kill them with clubs. If you hear a rabbit scream, it tears your heart out.
It felt like nature was out of control. Along with plagues and drought, the wind and dust brought yet another dangerous phenomenon. Static electricity, so strong it could knock a man off his feet. It could also kill crops. The simple action of the wind buffeting the dust particles as they rolled across the ground or lofted skyward caused friction and the buildup and transfer of electrical energy. It was like shuffling across a carpet, only on a giant scale.
Besides the sand getting charged up from hitting the ground and particles hitting each other, if sand hits metal, it charges up the metal.
At night, people could see blue flames, currents of static electricity discharging from barbed wire fences and the metal ties that held their windmills to the ground. During the day, many people couldn't avoid getting shocked by the electrical charges.
If your car is sitting in a dust storm, the whole car charges up to many thousands of volts. So you walk up to your old truck and get a 1-inch spark that almost knocks you out and makes your whole arm numb.
Electrical engineer William Beatty can recreate these powerful forces. Dust poured through a metal air compressor replicates the action of wind during a black blizzard. Inside the tube, the particles collide and charge, generating static electricity.
I have an exotic kind of voltmeter that can measure the voltage at a distance. The sand is going to collide with our farm implement and hopefully charge it up, just like things got charged up during the Dust Bowl era.
What are we reading now?
We're getting up to around 1,000 volts. These dust storms can go on for hours, charging slowly higher the whole time. If this was a car or a farm implement during the Dust Bowl, you wouldn't want to walk up and put your hand on it. You might wake up later after getting a big shock.
As the 30s progressed, the dust storms grew in strength and frequency. By the end of 1932, the wind had already sucked up 450 million tons of topsoil, enough to fill up Yankee Stadium some 200 times, and rolled it across the plains, covering the land in a thick blanket of dirt. While families hid inside, their cattle ran in circles, inhaling dust until they fell and died, their lungs caked with mud.
The humans could reason and take cover, where the cattle, they didn't know what to do.
Dead cattle meant no meat and no milk, one more hardship on top of fields that yielded no crops. As the drought continued, water became even more scarce. Most farmers relied on natural rainfall to irrigate their fields. Now, their only source of water came from 100 feet below the ground, pumped to the surface by windmills.
They had these little windmill kits they'd buy from Sears and Roebuck and put them up on their land, and it could come several gallons a second, but that was it.
The only way to irrigate crops or the kitchen garden was by the bucket.
At one point, they were actually eating tumbleweeds. Now, they would brine these in salt, and put them in a little pickle jar. And they had started out by feeding these brined tumbleweeds to their horses. And they thought after a while, well, if the horses will eat them, why not us?
Marjorie Heaney, who grew up in Hammond, Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, saw firsthand how hunger broke the spirits of proud farmers who are now unable to feed their families.
My dad had a general store. He sold all sorts of things. So I set up a little stand in the back of the store, and I sold gum and candy. I remember everybody seemed to have a small purse, and it had a little snap on it. And they'd open that purse so slowly, and they'd count a penny, and they'd count a dime, and they'd count a nickel, all very slow. They let go of that money, feeling like, oh, no, I don't want to give this up. As a child, I saw hopelessness and despair because so many people grew old quickly because of their terrific responsibilities. They would come to the grocery store and have no money and had to ask for credit. It was sad because they had not come up that way.
Foreclosure was a reality for many farmers. Bank auctions became a regular event. Neighbors tried to help each other out, agreeing in advance to bid low so the owner could afford to buy back his property.
Somebody would say, I bid a penny, and someone over here say, I bid a penny. And then they would up it to 2 cents, 3 cents, a nickel maybe at the most, and they would say, sold to the man for a nickel over here.
These penny auctions saved a few families, but still, in 1933, the bank seized 200,000 farms around the country. Despite pleas from politicians who represented the Dust Bowl states, little help came from Washington. At the height of the Depression, times were tough all over.
By 1932, 1 in 4 adult Americans did not have a job. And there was no such thing as unemployment either. No such thing as Social Security. No such thing as food stamps. 14 million people were out of work.
Bread lines in cities and shuttered banks across the country got the most attention, taking precedence over the crisis in the High Plains. For some, the struggle to survive the Dust Bowl proved just too hard.
I know now that there was a lot of people that was having deep depression. There was one man that committed suicide. It was common to see people wring their hands and kind of in despair.
After years of relentless dust and drought, many farm families teetered on the brink of survival. But now, people outside the Dust Bowl were starting to pay attention, shocked by a dust storm that reached their doorsteps and by iconic images that appeared in newspapers and played in movie theaters around the country.
Dust that rides in the wind, that spreads over increasing areas. Those behind closed doors and tight windows must inhale a daily quota of powder dust